Hello, it's May 2023, and this video is going to be different to the types of videos that I normally do. And over the many years that I've been doing videos, over a decade now, I've referenced movies when there was something inspiring about them. And definitely this movie could be tied in with the world today. I'll be word crafting my words for obvious reasons. The movie is called Pontypool. It was made in 2008. It only made about 33,000 at the box office, and that's a shame. It's a Canadian movie. The plot is in Ontario, Canada, and it's actually the acting of the main characters is exceptional. And the whole movie really just is in this small building, primarily in one little part of the small building. And again, it's definitely a movie that's, I've never heard of it, and you probably never heard of it, but it's worth watching. And I'm going to leave the link in the description box, the full movie for free, for you to watch it. Now, this movie, I was inspired to watch this movie. I don't watch movies, but I was inspired by this movie for several reasons. One, Canadian. Two, Ontario. And three, the main plot, the theme of the movie. I found it very interesting. And what's even more interesting is it ties in with a video, Careful What You Say, and water, and how things that we say reverberate through the air and so forth. It's kind of a loose tie-in with this movie, but this movie does parallel, for example, I'm going to say it, other zombie movies. Now, we don't know the cause or anything. It's just basically the movie starts where something is happening, and this radio host at a radio station, he's driving along. He ends up stopping in the middle of a snowstorm for a moment, and the lady had come out of the snowstorm, banged on his window, repeating something, and then disappears back into the snowstorm, which he thought was kind of weird. Now, I'm not going to give away the ending or anything else, but I just want to give an idea of the main part of the movie here. So he goes to the radio station, which is in the small building. If I'm not mistaken, it's one of those old, tiny countryside little churches, and they are broadcasting from this place. And so as the movie progresses, and you go through all the different dialogues and everything else, there's really only 3-4 main characters, and again, their acting is really well done. You would never know it was a low-budget movie at all. Now, at one point in the movie, one of their news reporters was saying what he was observing, like they had him live on the air, and he was observing a crazed mob attacking this doctor's office. And at one point, and they kept going back and forth with this guy, this news reporter, and then at one point there was an interruption of the broadcast between the news reporter and this radio host, and they didn't know where the signal was coming from. It kind of like someone had hacked into it, and it was in French. Now, for people who don't know, part of Canada is French, but anyway. And so they translated it, and so the radio host guy, he was reading what this was, and it was a warning, basically to be careful of what you say and things not to say, etc. And they were trying to figure out what's going on here. So as the movie progresses, the doctor whose office was being attacked ended up sneaking into this little church radio station setup, and he identified himself, and he knew a little bit more what was going on. And at first he was thinking that these people who were zombie-like were being attracted to sound, voices specifically. But it was during one of the times when they were talking in the booth, because the doctor said, well, we have to go into, we want to go into this soundproof booth where they do the, the recordings. He realized that it wasn't so much them being drawn towards hearing the sounds, but the understanding of the words. And if I'm not mistaken, it was only certain English words, not all English words, but certain English words were sort of a trigger. And it put people into some sort of zombie-like state. Now, it's not just the words that was creating this event. There was some sort of pathogen that somehow entered into people, and the understanding of words, these trigger words, kind of allowed them to take over their host, the human host. And it's a zombie movie, but it's not really. There's probably one scene that's somewhat grotesque, but it's very simply done. And the movie kind of overall reminds me of how movies from the old days were made. There was no CGI, there was none of this action-packed. It was suspenseful, and it was kind of like I guess we could call it a drama / sci-fi, post-apocalyptic type of movie. And anyway, the movie continues on, and I'm not going to give away the ending because it's worth watching. But this is kind of the gist of the movie. Now, why am I talking about this movie? Well, the movie loosely ties in to a more recent video that I've done with regards to be careful what you say and water. And I talk about how what we say reverberates through the air, and air being a form of water. And this ties into, for example, when people have, say, for example, people who are involved in witchcraft and that type of stuff, they have certain chants and certain words, trigger words. And when you tie this all in together, you start to see a picture forming. And this ties into the world today. It was a very interesting movie, and people say, might say that this is, really kind of really stretching the whole zombie genre. I was going to segue for a moment. We are so accustomed to zombie movies being fictional, but throughout the history that we're told, it appears that these type of things were real, perhaps even real today. Now, I'm just going to interject here. I remember around, was it 2012, I believe, 2011, how there were different events all around the world affecting different people. And the one that really, I think, got the world's attention was there was a homeless man who had half his face eaten off by this crazed individual who was running around the streets naked. And they were blaming drugs, if I'm not mistaken, bath salts. And we started hearing these reports around the U.S., all around the world, in every country. But when you started really looking into it, it weren't drugs. For example, I can't remember if it was, I believe it was in Japan. There was a bus driver. He was just driving along. Everything was normal. He ended up stopping in the middle of an intersection. And there's videos of this. or at least there used to be. And he got off the bus, and then he ran into the intersection. Again, this is all on video. And he went and attacked a lady, I believe it was a lady, driving a car, who was stopped in the intersection wondering what's going on. And he was trying to eat this lady. Now, there's a lot of these stories been going on since around 2011, 2012. And then we don't hear anything. And apparently, if you just kind of dig a little bit, it doesn't seem to have stopped. Now, we don't know to what extent this may be going on to this day, but that bus driver, he was driving a bus. He wasn't on bath salts or taking any drugs or alcohol or anything. A lot of these people that, when they do the autopsies of these people who were zombie-like, no drugs, no alcohol, nothing. And then everything just kind of got hushed up, which is interesting. Now, just going back to this movie, for example, a lot of people, with everything going on in today's world, they're worried about electronic waves and all these different things being some sort of trigger for something. But what if it's words, the understanding of these words? Now, there's a fine line between saying a word and then understanding the word, because when you say it, you already understand it. But just look at it as, for example, as a trigger. Now, where else have we heard something like this before? For example, the Manchurian Candidate. Now, when this first came out decades ago, everyone thought, oh, this is conspiracy theorist type of thing and all this other nonsense. And then it came out, yeah, this is actually a real thing, where, for example, people are programmed to commit a certain type of act or do something based on a word. And the words could be, say, called in on a telephone or spoken or whatever, and that was a trigger, and boom. And sometimes I think there's even phrases that can be a trigger. So we see this with this Manchurian Candidate thing, where words are a trigger. Now, when you compound that with something, a pathogen, for example, and I've talked about prions and how prions are, I'm trying to remember the exact phrase, they're known as like the zombie pathogen, because they essentially turn their host into like a zombie. Now, when you start combining all this stuff, and I'm going to pose this as a rhetorical question, what if the words, or there's a set of words or something that could trigger a pathogen somehow? Now, obviously, I'm not a biologist or into biology. I did study advanced biology and stuff like that in school a long time ago. By no means am I an expert on the topic, but what if certain words trigger an emotion? That emotion releases certain chemicals in the body. Who knows? It sounds really far-fetched, but a lot of the things that seemed far-fetched, 2, 3, 5, 10 years ago, become true, haven't they? So, if there's a trigger word of some sort, of trigger phrase, you have these pathogens, these prions, for example. What if that is the real trigger? It makes sense. Where else do we see trigger words that are socially conditioned in today's world, for the past 7, 8 years? And you see this a lot with various social justice movements and these social justice warriors, and things triggering them and them getting upset and everything else, and creates create safe spaces and all this other nonsense. So it's very real. You know, social justice types, they will be triggered to react when they hear something that, for example, is not politically correct. And you've seen my air quotes when I said that, right? Now, where else can we start observing human behavior in a mass? Well, we can talk about social justice, warrior types, or even, well, that's where we really see this. But we also see this with other things. But I'm going to use social justice as an example, where they will riot and start beating on people for no reason, because there's a thought, there's a word spoken, understood, and people react. We also see this, and no one's exempt. I'm not going to be picking on one particular profession right now, but I'm going to use them as an example, where you might see somebody being interacting with the police. They surrender, they go on the ground, put their hands and everything stretched out, and the police will still pile up on top of them, causing severe injury, even at times beating them. And the more show up, everyone just kind of seems to jump in, just like we see with the mob mentality with social justice when they don't like something. And no matter what scenario you're using here, you would think at least one person would step back and go, wait a minute, what are we doing here? Like, this has gone too far. There's a human being that's being pounced on here. We don't ever see that. Now, we see something had triggered it. A thought, a word, boom. So it's not a far stretch to think, for example, I'm not saying that this is factual, but it's not a stretch of the imagination to think that if there's a pathogen inside the body and a word is spoken, which implies understood, boom. The fact in the movie it's only in English would possibly hint that this could be some sort of weapon, or perhaps the pathogen, and however this thing would be working, started off, say, around English, and it hadn't evolved with other languages, for example. Now again, that's just speculation on a fictional movie, and I'm just simply trying to give some food for thought, because everyone's focused on, again, I'm going to use the example, like electromagnet stuff and sound waves and everything going through the air. And this ties into be careful what you say, because what you say reverberates through the air being water. And then it all ties in with, well, you don't even need witchcraft. You can, there's people in various religions who chant and everything else. Just things to think about. Okay? Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share.
Listen to this and write it down if you can't remember it. You're never going to outgrow warfare. You simply must learn to fight. I hear people saying to me all the time, when is it going to get easier? When you die.